Don't you just hate it when you don't get a decent sleep? It seemingly throws off everything and ruins the day before it even gets started. And yes, the data appears to back that up. Sleep loss has been shown to increase inflammatory markers throughout the body. But wait a minute. What if there's another layer to the discussion and the data analysis? What if a broad, overall positive approach, something called trait positive effect, or PA, in the literature, changes the equation? What if the way we look at life as a whole could change the effects of a bad night of sleep? Could our mental state buffer the pro-inflammatory effects of various forms of sleep? Welcome to the latest episode of the Health, Wellness, and Performance Catalyst. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, co-founder of the Catalyst Coaching Institute, and today's guest is Dr. Carly Hunt. Dr. Hunt is a licensed psychotherapist, has a PhD in counseling psychology and a master's in kinesiology, and completed a postdoc fellowship in biobehavioral pain research at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. She's the founder of Present Mind Consulting, and we discovered her when our son Joshua, who's currently in med school with a special interest in sleep medicine, came across her research on the influence of affect on sleep loss. As always, if you have questions about your own coaching career or integrating best-in-class coaching into your organization's benefit plans, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, and we'll connect with a call or an email to get your questions answered. If you're looking to pursue your certification as a health and wellness coach, our final cohort of 2022 is already underway. But if you'd like to get registered for the next one that kicks off in late January and allows you to get an early running start, there is an option to get that on-demand coursework if you get registered now. Details, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. That's catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or drop us an email anytime. Now, it's time to discover the effect of our affect with sleep, stress, and more with Dr. Carly Hunt on the latest episode of the Health, Wellness, and Performance Catalyst. Dr. Hunt, great to have you here. A long story on how we found you and your research, but this is going to be a fun discussion with a lot of rabbit trails.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. It's really great to be here with you.
So lots of fascinating research aspects we're going to jump into, but your history is really interesting. You combined a master's in kines with a PhD in counseling psychology, and then you postdoc in biobehavioral pain research. How did that come together? Like, what's going on here? You weren't 17 going, okay, so I'm going to get my master's in kinesiology, and then I'll do my PhD, and then how did that come together?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So yes, I did take a pretty circuitous route to where I am today. And I think essentially I really just followed my interests, and I can sort of walk through it. I mean, when I was I was an NCAA golfer. So that was a huge part of my identity. And I was studying psychology as an undergraduate at Georgetown, and I was really just fascinated by elite performance, and I was drawn to the sports psychology field. And I ended up finding a program at the University of Maryland that was looking at specifically the brain dynamics underlying elite performance under pressure. And I thought that would be a really neat sort of path to take into performance psychology. And so I enrolled in the master's program, and it was really fascinating stuff. I mean, we were doing a lot of work on elite marksmen and other, kind of as a model for an elite performance situation, and seeing, what are the brain dynamics that support best performance? And alongside that, we were doing some work on physical activity participation and the effects on cognitive function in older adults, and looking at how that can essentially turn back the clock on cognitive decline, like really exciting stuff. So I was really inspired by that research, and I kind of wanted to get sort of off the bench, so to speak, and more into an applied research setting. So that sort of led me towards counseling psychology, because I could continue doing research on health and well-being and performance, and also seek clinical licensure as a psychologist. So I did my PhD, and during that time, I focused my research on positive emotions, which we're going to talk more about today.
Yes.
And and also mindfulness training, because and through that, I was doing health psychology focused research through that degree, and then when I was graduating, a former mentor of mine at Johns Hopkins was just starting up a new study. This is like 3 years ago now, looking at the effects of meditation training on pain, chronic pain, and basically comparing a couple of different types of meditation training, and specifically whether if training in positive emotions through meditation can reduce pain in the clinical population. And that was really up my alley. So, and I had also myself experienced chronic pain for about a year during graduate school. So it sort of had this personal meaning to me too, as well as professional. And so, so yeah, I joined the lab and I did that fellowship. And so we completed that study, and those results are currently being written up now and look pretty exciting. And, we also, I also did the analyses that we're going to talk a little bit more about today on sleep and positive emotions. Yeah, so that's kind of where I came to be where I am today.
You caught me early when you're talking about being an NCAA golfer. We had Kelly McGonigal on. She talked about research is generally me search. Was that drawing into this stuff as you were a golfer because that was a strength for you, something that you felt like, okay, physically I'm average, but mentally I'm stepping up? Or was it the opposite where you're like, I'm a good golfer and I keep missing those putts. What can I do to tweak that? Was that kind of what pulled you in?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I think actually my mental game was strong and my physical game was not as strong as the people I played against. I was always a very short hitter, not how much golf you play, but, I think there's definitely, some physical talent obviously that goes into, playing any sport. But I definitely felt like for me, like I was always fascinated by the mental side of the game. And I felt like I was, mentally tough. And I thought, and I was often the person that teammates would come to talk through, different issues. And, so I was really kind of excited to understand that more and to work with folks on that aspect. I think because I did find it so helpful for fulfilling, and I think when I discovered sports psychology, I was very inspired. I was like, this is awesome. Like, I wish I'd known about this
secret
earlier,
potion. So, yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. So let's set the stage for this in terms of the concepts of positive and negative trait effect. So can you walk us through, help us to understand what's the difference? How does it fit in? Are there measurement tools that we use for this? And then hold off on the last piece as far as the influence of various aspects of life. We're going to talk more about sleep, but I want to dive into some of it. So first of all, can you just help us understand what is positive trait effect? What is negative trait effect? And are there ways we can measure it, or do you just recognize it when you see it?
Yeah, definitely. So positive and negative affect are basically they're traits that we have. So we all have a certain level of, positive emotion that we tend to experience like day to day, and negative emotion. And then we also fluctuate around kind of what our tendency is. So of course, on certain days we feel like better or worse than others, intuitively. So positive affect is, positive emotion is basically a synonym. It's, pleasurable emotions like joy and contentment and serenity, calm, etc. And then, intuitively negative affect is the opposite, anger, jealousy, etc. And so scientists have, some estimates have been put forth that yes, like our general level of affect or emotion, there is a genetic component to that, but there's also a really large lifestyle component to that we can actually modify, like what our sort of genetics, our genetically, that genetic influence. And we can talk more about that. But in terms of measurement tools in science, frequently scientists will use basically just a questionnaire where they're asked people to report on how much positive or negative emotion they experienced over a period of time or on a particular day. And then, that's like a one-time questionnaire. So that's what, we've used in our research. But of course, we're not really very good at remembering how we felt over a long period of time. So right. Scientists are also frequently using what's called experience sampling, which is where we basically ping people at least once a day, usually via smartphones. Now there are lots of different apps for this to kind of get a sense in people's daily lives, like what are the emotions that they're experiencing, and we can look at a more granular, detailed level at what people are feeling, what kind of factors are influencing emotions, and then we can also, of course, like take an aggregate, summary of what their emotions look like over a period of weeks. And then I guess I'll also mention, there are some more psychophysiological ways of trying to look at positive emotions. So in my colleagues and I had, used fMRI brain scanning to look at the functioning of the reward system. So there's sort of a network in the brain that activates when we're experiencing positive emotions, when we're engaging with rewarding things. And we can look to see, at least in an experimental context, like if that system is activated. Of course, that's not practical for daily life because we can't, do fMRIs on people in their day-to-day life, which is where we do the experience sampling, like I mentioned. Yeah.
So just here's a little rabbit trail. Self-awareness. It seems to me, and maybe I'm not self-aware, but it seems to me a lot of people who have more of the negative affect are not self-aware. They don't even realize it. Like they're just walking through grumpy, and people, their family gets it, their friends get it, coworkers get it, but they have no idea. Like, so when you're pinging people, is there some sort of, do you go through some pre-work of, look, you're kind of a grump dog, so I want you to tune into that. Like, you don't use that wording, but is there anything like that you're, I don't know, or am I off base? Is self-awareness similar for positive and negative affect? We are who we are, whatever.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yes. I mean, I would say self-awareness and our level of self-awareness in terms of our ability to report on what we're thinking and how we're feeling is kind of like a confound in psychology in general, particularly on measures of mindfulness. So, mindfulness being defined as like how non-judgmentally aware we are of what's happening in ourselves and around us. And people that are more mindful are more aware of how much their mind is all over the place versus people who are less aware. So when it comes to like self-report instruments, be they pinging through the smartphone or a questionnaire, that's kind of a limitation of those methods. We can try to train people. I mean, when we bring people into a study, we explain to them like what we're measuring, how to answer the questionnaires and things like that. But oftentimes scientists will try to pair a self-report approach with something, more physiological, like looking at, maybe heart rate or, like I mentioned, like fMRI scanning or something to hopefully get like two different sources of data that kind of line up to try to deal with that bias. But yeah, that's a great point.
Right. Interesting. All right. So what does this do for? How does this influence if I'm got more PA or positive affect or NA negative affect? How does that influence things? And again, let's push sleep to the side because we want to dig into that one. But how does that affect various aspects of my life or somebody's life as they're going through school or work or relationships or marriage or career changes, et cetera?
Yeah. So starting off with positive emotion. So we essentially have positive emotion in order to help us explore, make connections in our environment and gain new skills. Like increasingly psychology has looked at, what is the purpose of positive emotion? And increasingly we see it may do a couple of things. So it sort of broadens how we look at the world. It can make us be more creative, more interested in play, kind of building resources that we need, to survive in groups. And then conversely, negative affect is also useful. I want to say this first. So negative affect is essential. So we need to feel fear in order to escape threats, not to walk out in traffic. We need anger to tell us if someone's violating us in some way, for example. Shame might motivate us to restore social bonds in some way. So from an evolutionary perspective, like emotions give us information about what's happening in our environment, and they motivate us to do different things.
So the negative is protective and the positive is potential, or is that oversimplification? I mean, it obviously is a little bit one.
Yeah, but it's a nice summary. Yeah, I think that negative affect is protective. It sort of usually goes along with, sympathetic nervous system activation like fight or flight, which, our ancestors needed to escape tigers in the bushes, et cetera. Whereas, positive affect does encourage us to look for, rewarding things in our environment and to go after those rewards, be they social or, food or new opportunities, et cetera.
Okay.
And it's also important to mention that, and I'll say a little bit more. I can go on about this for quite a while, but I think just because they're also not opposites. Like for a while, well, there are some, I guess, that subscribe to this thinking, but my research doesn't, and research from many doesn't really support this. Is that it was kind of once thought that negative emotion and positive emotion were like polar opposites. Like if you didn't have a whole lot of negative emotion, then you necessarily had positive emotion. And that's not really the case. Like I think a useful analogy is like a relationship. Like just because a relationship doesn't have conflict in it doesn't mean that it's really joyful and fulfilling, right. So that's just something to point out that, we can just specifically work on positive emotion and see benefits from that. And we can talk more about that. But in terms of like health benefits, so we've talked about how positive affect sort of promotes, exploration, and building of resources. Research also is starting to sort of uncover how, positive emotion impacts our physical health. And so like large population studies have shown that people that are higher in trait like positive affect, like live longer, have better cardiovascular health outcomes, better pain-related outcomes, and that may be happening through a couple of mechanisms. The first of which being just direct effects on physiology. So if we're sort of in a calm, serene, contented state, we're sort of bringing our parasympathetic nervous system online, which is the part of the nervous system that helps us rest and restore, and repair, et cetera, which we need for long-term health. And it also may impact our health behaviors. So like if I'm feeling good, I'm more likely to go out for a run and exercise or eat well versus like reach for sugar or engage in physical inactivity. So over the course of one's life, that's a huge, important mechanism through which positive affect might impact our physical health. And then lastly, there's the stress buffering hypothesis, which is that when we have stress in our life, if we sort of have a bucket, so to speak, of positive emotion, we're going to be better able to handle stressors that come our way, and maybe engage in more adaptive coping strategies. Maybe we might view ourselves in a more positive light and more capable of handling stress. And so that's like another potential pathway. But yeah, the data are really fascinating. I think, kind of a seminal study that put positive emotion on the map in terms of physical health benefits was basically they took a group of healthy volunteers, researchers did, and they infected them with a cold virus. Like people actually signed up to do this study, which is like remarkable. But they also just recorded their positive emotion in daily life. And so fascinating, those that were higher in positive emotion were less likely to get colds. And, so I think that was just kind of, and then since then, there's just been a ton of research looking at the different like ways in which positive emotion impacts health.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'm sorry I interrupted you there, but I'm just thinking, oh my gosh. So if I have that positive affect, I'm less likely to get sick, which means I'll probably have more positive affect. Like it seems like it's compounding, almost like compounding interest. Once you get on that path, you have benefits that allow you to be more likely to stay on that path.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. And researchers have used the term upward spiral to kind of capture that very thing that you're saying. Earlier on in psychology's history, there was way more focus on negative emotion and sort of the downward spiral, and all the negative things that happen if we're kind of stuck in anxiety or depression, and how that's worse for our health. And kind of just similarly to positive affect, we've seen that it is worse for our physical health because we're caught in fight or flight. But yeah, there was a kind of a shift, like, well, we're focusing on this downward spiraling and how to prevent that. Well, let's also look at more like an upward spiral and how can we set that in motion. And positive affect does seem to be a key piece to sort of setting that in motion.
That's so cool. All right, can we change? Is it just who we are? Is it just like you got positive, I'm negative? It's like I'm 6 feet tall, you're 5'9". Or is it? Talk us through this. What's going on here?
Right. Yes. So happiness researchers most recently have been summarizing this, like if you think about this in percentages. So the current estimates that I'm aware of are that about half of our happiness level is caused by our genetic makeup. So that's kind of like, like the way we are, so to speak. And then about it seems to be tied with our life circumstances. So, if we're living in a war-torn country or if we're in poverty, like we need a certain amount of resources in order to be happy. And then that leaves the remaining 40% to what scientists call intentional activities. And so I can talk us through a variety of evidence-based intentional activities that have been shown to boost happiness in the context of research. And but to kind of come back to your question, like we do have like a lot of agency over our sort of set point, as it's sometimes called, in terms of our happiness level.
I definitely want to go through those. Let me make sure I've got those numbers right, because my eyes are wide open if I wrote it down right. 50% genetics, 10% life circumstances, 40% the decision, the choices.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Like if you think about after we have as we get our needs met in terms of our financial
you're not starving.
Resources.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But then it's sometimes we have this delusion that if we just had more money or more success or whatever, we would be happier. But that's, wisdom traditions across the world say that's not the case. And science agrees with that, that it is more about intentional decision-making and lifestyle habits. Yes. Which is pretty amazing. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So take us through it. What did we do?
Right. Yeah. So I think I'll just start off with mindfulness. So we've talked about that a little bit already. So awareness is like a key, I think, kind of an underlying sort of baseline for a lot of evidence-based practices that support happiness. And so that again refers to being aware of our own minds and relating to ourselves and others in a non-judgmental, accepting kind of way. So if we're just kind of racing through our day, distracted, kind of on autopilot, we're really not able to engage with all the many gifts that life is presenting to us, so to speak, and so that sort of paves the way for some other evidence-based practices. And I think next I'll talk about savoring, which, just like it sounds, just refers to being able to be mindful of and savor and appreciate positive experiences as they come to us, so you can think even throughout any day, there are all kinds of small, positive experiences that present themselves, just the moments that we spend with family and friends, even, our physical health. Like right now, I'm not feeling any pain at all. Like I can savor that, etc. But if we're kind of racing on to the next thing, tumbling forward into the future, we're not able to really savor and appreciate those experiences.
It's a perfect word, because you automatically go to whatever you enjoy eating, and the difference between putting it in your mouth and swallowing it and savoring it. Like it just saying it makes you okay. So that's a good one. Yes. I agree. It's it's so simple, but it's very, powerful. And I think it's simple, but not easy.
A lot of us are, it's not easy. No. Right. And I think another source of, reward and positive affect, that, we as individuals need and our society is kindness and generosity, pro-social behavior. So I think we can all identify with like the immediate rewards that come with doing something for others. But then it's also like doing that also helps us build what some scientists call social capital or social connections. So the more that we put out, like the more we're likely to get that back from others and be held in a social network. And social connections might be, the most important piece for positive affect and well-being. Really? I mean, our relationships give us so much, and I think and so I think nurturing connections, be they few or many, is really been, the evidence is astounding in terms of social support and how important it is for health. And it's really been a challenge with the pandemic for people to connect meaningfully with others. And so I really see that as something important to pay attention to.
Well, it seems like that upward spiral really takes off when it comes to connection, because you don't want to be around somebody that's mad and disappointed and grumpy. So that piece, it seems like the PANA really spirals upward or downward in relationship to that piece.
Yes, I think that the research does show that if we train in positive emotion, it does help us build more meaningful social connections. And, that could be because we're, more motivated to kind of get out and engage with others, or maybe, other people perceive us as more open or, interested in connecting, things like that. Yeah. And then I think I'll also just mention spirituality and nature contact. So I think a big piece of positive affect and well-being is sort of feeling like we're connected to something larger than ourselves, and also just, being out in the natural world. So I think if we're constantly on our iPhones or getting lost online, et cetera, we sort of forget how connected we really are with the natural world.
Right.
And, maybe with something more spiritual or like larger than the small self.
Definitely. Excellent. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the rumination piece, the negative effect. I know that I have a tendency, something will go wrong and I'll start to cycle downward with that. It sounds like I'm not alone with the fact that you had a phrase for that. If somebody's out there and they're saying, I have a tendency to do that too, are there things to put the brakes on it, to say, okay, I see myself doing it, so there's a mindful thing. Is there, boom, is it these things you mentioned, like, well, just take a moment to savor, get outside, enjoy being outside, tap into that faith that you've built throughout your life, connect with that. Is it the same things that build the positive, help put the brakes on the negative, or do we have a different list we need to look at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I definitely think that the mindfulness piece can be equally helpful for rumination. So you mentioned like you are aware when you start to go down the downward spiral. And then this is where I'll just talk a little more in detail about this process. I think it can be helpful to recognize that, rumination, call them like negative thoughts. Mm-hmm. They're real in the sense that they're happening, but they're usually not true. So we sort of get caught in what I've heard termed like a virtual reality. And so each time you notice, that you're in this virtual world, is to just say, oh, there's virtual reality, or label it in some way, see it like a, picture on a movie screen, and then sort of come back to the present moment. And so, that can be coming back to the present can look like, taking a deep breath, like feeling your feet on the ground, kind of grounding yourself in the present and like the actual reality. And then the other thing about rumination is oftentimes the self is the star. Like usually there's this story going on, and oftentimes it involves falling short in some way. Like, I'm not enough, I screwed up, I'll probably screw up in the future, etc. And so this is where I actually think self-compassion is really powerful antidote to rumination. And self-compassion, I'll talk a little bit about what that is, but it's just kind of like it sounds. It's really treating ourselves the way a best friend would. So most of us would never talk to our friends the way that we talk to ourselves sometimes. I mean, if you had to, it would just be ridiculous, So I love to point that out. And, most people will agree with that. They'd be like, I would never talk to people I care about the way I talk to myself. And so I think something so simple as like, what would my very best friend, or it could be anything. It could be even like a pet or a spiritual figure or some kind of representation of kindness. Like, what would that message be right now? And can I offer that to myself? And it's a practice, all of this is a practice. It's not like a quick fix, especially if you're one that's kind of engaged in some self-criticism, but self-compassion is a whole, I can, send you some resources for how to tap some of those resources, but it's evidence-based and it's really helpful. And then, lastly, I would say, a classic technique with rumination, which some people benefit from, is kind of like a journaling approach, is to sort of write down the rumination, write down the negative thoughts, and then writing out some statements that kind of like refute those thoughts. That's kind of called like keeping a thought record, which can be helpful for folks as well.
So the research, this is great stuff. I'm having fun. I think people are like, oh my God, give us more. The research that brought you to our attention, our son's in med school. He was doing some research during his break to do a meta-analysis with somebody and found one of your studies looking at the fact that limited sleep, we know it increases inflammation. We know it affects a lot of aspects of our lives, but your study showed something a little unique. If we have the PA going on, positive affect, we don't see the same level of inflammatory markers as we do in someone with negative affect. I just went, what? Like he sent it to me, he said, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. You got to check this out. And so anyway, I'll be quiet. Tell us what happened. What'd you find? What was going on with this? What doors does this open?
Yeah, it's really exciting stuff. So yeah, I mean, and you summarized it. Maybe I'll just sort of explain the main finding and then, walk us back and sort of say how we did this.
Perfect.
But basically, yeah, we found that people that were higher in dispositional or trait-like positive affect, that really served as an important protective factor in the context of sleep deprivation. So what happened was we had a group of healthy volunteers that, volunteered for our research, and we brought them into the laboratory and they completed 2 conditions. The first of which was a sleep disruption protocol. So we have people spending 2 nights in our laboratory and we're waking them up multiple times throughout the night, like kind of how like real life insomnia is supposed to look, right?
Yeah.
And then they also completed just a regular sleep. They came into the lab and just slept uninterrupted for the control condition. And prior to that, we had them just fill out a questionnaire describing their typical levels of positive and negative emotion. And so then after they did the sleep deprivation protocol, we took blood samples to assess their levels of inflammation. And so we found that it was only among people that were low in positive affect. So people who didn't have those positive affective resources saw a significant increase in their inflammation after not sleeping well. Yeah. Whereas those folks with positive emotion were pretty unperturbed by this stressor, of sleep deprivation. So it was pretty fascinating. And we saw that negative affect didn't really play much of a factor. We controlled for that in all of our analyses, and it was really positive emotion.
Just the absence of.
Right. Yes. So it's, pretty exciting stuff. And I think it kind of points out, potentially, more studies need to be done on this, of course, but, perhaps, this is one pathway by which positive affect affects our health over the long term. Because if it does protect us from the inflammatory consequences of sleep loss, over months and years, like maybe that's some way that we're able to preserve our health through better positive emotion.
So let me just restate it, folks. You had a bad sleep last night. And please correct me, Carly. You have a bad sleep last night. The way you respond to that will affect not just your interactions with other people that day, but literally your inflammatory markers.
Yes, with one caveat. So we didn't actually, in this particular study, we looked at sort of people's typical positive affect. So basically kind of like the amount of positive emotion I have in my bucket. Yeah. So kind of like how much positive affect I sort of tend to carry around with me. If that bucket is full, I'm going to not really be that impacted from sleep loss in terms of my inflammatory profile. Future studies I think should look at, and I wish we could have done this, is like the next day when you wake up, like all the, the rumination about how, I didn't sleep well, or, this and that, like how does that impact, is that a pathway through which this works? But basically this refers to kind of your sort of set point level of positive emotion. And so it speaks to the importance of nurturing positive emotion in general, so that when you face poor sleep, you're going to be able to maintain, you're not going to see a spike in your inflammation the next day, if that makes sense.
It does. And the thing that popped into my mind was I was reading your research is there any component of the challenge threat research with this but what you just said is really no, because Brad, we didn't really look at that day's choice, whether I'm going to take this as a challenge, I'm going to be good, and I'm going to be just fine, or, oh no, I didn't sleep well, life is going to pot, it's going to be terrible. You're saying it's the baseline. You as a baseline, you had higher PA or lower PA, and as a result of that baseline, the inflammation. So in this study, challenge threat was not involved one iota.
No, not specifically. I mean, I think we can make some speculations that relate to that challenge and threat.
Let's do that.
Research, which is, we love that. So, scientists love to speculate. So I was thinking about this before our talk, and, positive reappraisal, which just means seeing the silver linings of things, is really highly correlated with positive affect. So they probably have a bidirectional relationship. Like if I see the good in things, I'll probably feel more positive emotion. And when I'm feeling positive emotion, it'll be easier to see the good things in life, So and we all, like, there's another study that I'm aware of looked at positive reappraisal in this context, and those researchers found that positive reappraisal exerted a similar protective influence on the relationship between sleep and inflammation. So I think, we could certainly speculate that, if you think of an athlete that didn't sleep well, before the big race, if they're saying, well, yeah, I didn't sleep well, I'll probably blow it. It's certainly possible that if that person was higher in trait like positive affect, it might be easier to access more of a positive reappraisal and say, well, I didn't sleep well, but that doesn't mean I can't perform well today.
Yeah. Okay. What about the idea of the PA baseline? Is it relatively constant across the population, or is it like so many other things in life where it's real high and stay on? I'm just thinking of Susanna and myself, very different personality. Susanna's my wife, very different personalities. She is really good about being positive pretty much across the board. I'm super positive, like way more positive than anybody knows. And then I'm way down. And then so it's like we're probably on average, if you tested us every 15 minutes for a week, our number would be the same. But hers is very nice and constant. And I'm like, it's amazing. It's not so great. It's amazing. It's not so great. Is that,
yeah.
Am I looking at something different than PA, or is that just tied into different personalities?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So what you're talking about is what's called affect variability. And so I actually don't have an answer for you, because I do think the research is still, it's an active area of scholarship now, is like, what is the effect of having more variability in your positive emotion, like the up and down profile, versus someone who's kind of more like steady. And so these experience sampling methods, tracking emotions like many times throughout the day over many days, is what's going to give us insight into that, to see, I believe there's some, research to suggest that like more variability can be actually more beneficial, but I don't think we really know enough to like make definitive statements about that. Like, we do have a lot of research on level, like higher is generally better. But, even like an excessively high level of positive emotion all the time might not be beneficial.
Gets in trouble.
Like I said before. Right. Exactly. Exactly. So that's obvious, but it's, I do think, stay tuned for more research on the variability piece and what that means for health.
Okay. Very cool. Let's see. Any research on your radar that brings other elements into the equation? Example, maybe those who are exercising, eating well. You mentioned the connection piece is related to higher PA, and that modifies the sleep loss. Like, I have higher PA, so I've been eating better, I've been exercising, and so I have those defensive things to help me with the inflammation. So it's not even the PA, it's the result of the PA has me doing good things, and so the inflammation doesn't take off like it could have.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting possibility that I think is an empirical question, that can be explored in future studies coming out of this. I think the physical fitness piece is a great example, because in this study, we didn't measure physical fitness, and conceivably, but we measured positive affect, but we can say that, people that are physically fit, do tend to have, there's a relationship with positive affect there. So I do think, effects on health behaviors could be a mechanism at play here, certainly. And I think future research should take a look at that.
In a circle, it's not just the healthy behaviors affect PA, but then PA then drives more healthy behaviors, and it becomes that upward spiral where you talked about very early on.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what about, we got parents, coaches, coworkers, et cetera, that they'd love to help people that they're interacting with, not just their own lives. Suggestions of, because you can't just go up to somebody and go, you could be a lot more positive and this wouldn't influence you as much. Like, that doesn't work. So any tips for what we can be doing? Because your clients come to you and they're wanting it. So they're saying, Dr. Hunt, can you help me create more of X? But what about for the person who isn't tuned into the possibility? Is there anything a coach or a parent or a friend or a spouse can encourage or help support with these folks?
Like, in terms of kind of boosting positive emotion?
Exactly. Helping them nudge that PA a little bit.
Yeah, I think, that's a great question. I think it's certainly easier when someone already has it in mind that they want to, they want to grow their mindfulness skills or something along those lines. I do think, the psychoeducation piece is something that I use in my practice, with folks. I've also, worked with clients who aren't really kind of aware of, how they can use things like mindfulness or gratitude journaling or self-compassion as resources. So I think just educating people about how there is a lot of scientific evidence to support, positive psychological interventions, as they're sometimes called. A resource that I really like is the Greater Good Science Center. Listeners can Google that, and it's I think it's done by University of San Francisco, and they basically it's this awesome resource that and it's evidence based. Basically they've kind of put out different educational tools and practices that people can just use right away, like without having to necessarily work with a psychologist. But I think, providing some education and then, just kind of explore and after that, just exploring with people, what they think about it. Because I think, certainly, as like clinicians, we're collaborators. Like it's not, coming in and telling someone what to do, but just kind of maybe putting it out there and seeing if something in there might be of interest to a client. Because that's the other thing that, and the science supports this too, is this idea of person activity fit. So people, need to find things that support their wellness that they like to do. I mean, it's so simple, yes. But, that's, it's kind of maybe walking with someone on that journey to finding, some meaningful things that they can implement that they enjoy and that are meaningful to them.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Final words of wisdom, my friend. This is so valuable. I love this. I'm looking forward to the future research, but anything we haven't covered that you're like, oh, Brad, people have to know this. What else are we missing? What else is out there that would be helpful to our listeners?
I guess I'll mention two things. I do think that, sleep is just so fundamental. It just cuts across so many domains of mental and physical health. So I think, for listeners, like for themselves or for the clients they work with, I think good sleep is essential. So maybe working with folks who aren't sleeping well on just some basic sleep hygiene principles, which, don't have your phone in bed with you, things like that. Creating like a peaceful sleeping space, et cetera. And then if insomnia is a problem, like seeking out specialized treatment for insomnia. So cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is like a gold standard treatment and it's very effective. So I would say, keep an eye out for sleep issues. Cause I do think culturally, in US culture, like not sleeping has sometimes been looked at as like a badge of honor. It's like, well, I'm so busy that exactly. I'm not sleeping, but it's the opposite.
How cool am I?
Yeah, right. Exactly. But like we need a paradigm shift towards like sleep is essential for, resilience and well-being.
Well, don't you think that's happening? I get the sense because Suzanne was actually giving me a hard time this weekend when we first got married. So this is 30 years ago. I had this goal of, I want to be able to get up when there's still a 3 in the first number of the clock. And she's like, you're just weird. I don't know how this marriage happened, but go ahead and give it a shot. Like I thought it was cool back then, but now saying that out loud would be basically saying, you know what? I don't care about being at my best. I want to be functioning at 65%. So in fact, that reminds me. So before we hit record, you are doing so many things right now. Like you have so many plates spinning. We won't go into it here, but what are you doing? Like in your own life, in the midst of, you've got 17 plates spinning She has a 5-month-old. She started a new business. She's doing folks, anyone who thinks they're busy out there, you got nothing on her. She's just saying, hold my beer. And so what are you doing with your life to stay on the positive side of this stuff?
Oh my gosh, this is really making me laugh because yes, I do think I'm in a constant struggle to be less busy. But I do have a lot of interests and I have a lot going on, and I'm so blessed to have this adorable, 5-month-old son who I love. So for me, I really do value meditation. I do try to meditate every day. I definitely don't always. I find it challenging to set aside the time. But I find for me, like every morning I do some kind of centering practice. If I'm holding my tea, I close my eyes and I set some kind of intention for the day to live meaningfully. And I have found over the course of time, if I don't do that, I feel like more scattered, like I do. Yeah. And I do practice savoring. I love to take nature walks. Even if I'm just on my way somewhere, I'm intentional about paying attention to, where I am and, something beautiful. I mean, not every day, I get caught in the downward spiral, just, like Sure. Everybody does. Like we're all human beings. And then, I think the self-compassion piece, I've been someone who's very achievement oriented. I was an athlete and, I've gone and done a PhD and all this other stuff. And I think that, something that I've just found to be so profoundly helpful is self-compassion. And I find it helps me be more, balanced and even, do better at the work that I do because I don't have as much of that self-critic like happening. I'm blessed with being a really good sleeper. I don't know, I'm very grateful for that. I don't struggle with it. My husband really, he's kind of cursed. It's always a struggle. Yep. So, I think I got lucky also from that standpoint. Yeah.
That's a great place to wrap. This was so great. Well, let's stay in touch. We'll have some information in the description of the podcast so people can find you and follow your research and what you're working on and reach out to you if they have questions or want to consult with you. But thank you so much. In the midst of everything you got going, we really appreciate you sharing all this with us.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Brad. It's been a pleasure. You take care. And thanks again.
Wow. Definitely a growth opportunity for me. I hope you found a few nuggets in there that will make a difference in your life and those around you. Thanks for tuning in to the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. We were just alerted that this podcast is not just popular in the health and wellness coaching arena, but overall, it is in the top 1.5% of all podcasts. So thank you to those of you who've shared it with friends, peers, others. We got our single biggest day of downloads in 5 years recently, and that's a result of your support. So thank you. Next week's episode features Dr. Stephen Guyenet, best-selling author of The Hungry Brain. If you wonder why you struggle with various eating habits, this episode will be invaluable. We're here if you have any questions about coaching, either for your own professional pursuits or as part of your organizational strategy to help support the physical, emotional, and mental health of your employees. Results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com anytime. And get a call set up. And now, it's time to be that catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute signing off. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the Health, Wellness, and Performance Catalyst, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.